I'm Stuart Baird.
And I'm John Hassall. And this is the Glasgow Motorway Archive podcast.
You're joining us for part one of a two-part special series of podcasts covering the A1 in Scotland. And John, we have a special guest here to discuss the A1. Who is it?
We have...
myself, Duncan Macknight.
Welcome back.
How are we doing?
We're okay. So those who are regular listeners of the podcast will remember Duncan from the A9 podcast
Indeed.
specials that we did back in 2020. Duncan, nice to have you here again and in the studio.
Nice to be back.
Yeah.
Out away from the Highlands for the first time in a while.
Indeed. And this is a podcast that's been in preparation for quite some time.
Quite some time, yes. They've given me about 3 days of preparation. But we've pulled together something that will...
You've been researching for about 6 months, because I remember talking about it ages ago.
It's been a while, yeah.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of things to cover, so that's why we've decided to do this over two parts, because we don't want to squeeze too much in one episode. So I think it gives you a wee bit more time just to cover the main points in detail. And I know people will be interested in this particular route. It's a route I know fairly well. John, you don't know it just so much, is that right?
Not so much. I mean, I've been down it a few times for work, but generally it's not my preferred route for getting into England from that side. I tend to take the A68. So I'm an A68 fan, so you're going to have to win me over here, Duncan.
I'll do my best.
In fairness, I think, Duncan, you had to win yourself over a bit with the A1 as well, didn't you?
I was not a big fan of the A1 for quite some time, but now having researched it and driven down it, it's now... I prefer it a bit more than some of the other roads.
Okay, so in part one, we're going to discuss the history of the route.
Yes.
And we're also going to talk about the development of it through the decades. And we're going to cover really as far as the Haddington-Dunbar stretch in episode 1. And then in episode 2, we will talk about everything basically from Dunbar all the way down to Berwick.
Yes.
So that splits it up nice. So that's a good, convenient starting point. And there was a few people that we want to say thanks to.
Yes, there's a couple of people. I'll get my notes up here. We've thanks to our archive friend Graham Yule.
Yep.
He sent us lots of information, so thanks to him. Ian Hill, he's a Sabre colleague that I know. He's doing a lot of research with the A1, so he sent over a lot of information.
Good.
And our Fairhurst friends, Bob Pritchard, Kevin McCall and Ken McDowell, who were Fairhurst engineers at this time, they were involved in a lot of the A1 schemes.
That's right.
And they've sent over some information, so thank you to them.
Good. Good.
Shall we just launch straight into it?
So thanks to all these guys for giving us the information to produce this. Yeah, Duncan, take it away.
Okay, so the A1 is the longest road in the UK at 396 miles long, and it connects London and Edinburgh.
Okay.
And it's generally an eastern corridor up the UK.
Right.
But they sort of M6 up the west, you got A1 up the east. Briefly talking about London to Newcastle, the A1 is a mix of dual carriageway and upgraded motorway sections known as the A1M. It's a funny number. The first sort of dual section started appearing in the 1920s, 1930s, and the first section of the A1M appeared in 1961 at Doncaster Bypass. So that was back then.
Interesting.
From Newcastle to Edinburgh, it's kind of a different road because it's dual and single carriageway sections, given the lower traffic flows between Newcastle and Edinburgh. The A74 M6, when that was being built in the 60s and 70s, that became the more popular route.
Yep.
Okay.
So from Newcastle up to Edinburgh, it really didn't have a lot of improvements on it. I mean, the first Scottish dual carriageway section appeared in 1982.
That's very late
Which is quite late on, and then we started building sections at Edinburgh.
But it makes sense because of what you've said with the M6 corridor being the preferred one. So we've now ended up, I suppose, today with a route that's quite similar to the A9 in some ways. Some bits of dual, some bits of single.
Yeah, true, very much. So we'll go down. We'll start in Edinburgh.
Yeah,
A1 starts in Edinburgh.
The A1 itself actually starts at the end of Princes Street, doesn't it?
Outside the Balmoral Hotel.
Yeah.
Oh. There's an interesting fact I can throw in. Also starting outside the Balmoral Hotel is the A8.
Yep.
And the A7.
Yep.
And the A902. No, that's not right. The A900, I think it goes
so
north.
Yeah, so it's an important
there's a convergence of...
cross. Yeah,
it's similar in London. A lot of roads start down there at the same kind of place, like A1, A2, and that's how the road numbering system kind of works in the UK. Yeah.
These historic starting points for all roads in Edinburgh being a historic city.
Yeah.
It kind of makes sense. Now, Edinburgh-wise, you were looking for me to give a bit of an overview on the history of Edinburgh.
Yes, because briefly, the A1 sort of winds its way out of Edinburgh. All these A roads wind their way out of Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And back in the day, back in the 1940s, Patrick Abercrombie, who was involved with Glasgow,
Yes,
he was involved in Edinburgh because
Yes.
Edinburgh had a bit of a traffic problem.
Yeah.
It still does.
Indeed.
And they wanted to do something with it. So, Stuart, I'm going to hand over to
Yeah.
you.
So we were fortunate that we managed to get a copy of Abercrombie's Civic plan for Edinburgh
Yes.
recently, and that was able to fill in some gaps. And it was a good read. It was interesting. It's very different to the Glasgow plan. It's a lot less ambitious in scale to the Clyde Valley plan, but that's perhaps because it's centred on the city rather than a wider area. He had roads proposals within the report, and interestingly, there's a number of things in there that were developed further. The first one that stood out to me was the development of a crossing of the Forth at Queensferry.
Okay.
Also became the Forth Road Bridge. That was first detailed in that report. He also had plans for an outer bypass of Edinburgh,
Sounds
more
familiar.
or less in the corridor that it ended up in.
Yeah.
Although even in his report it stated that it wouldn't be required until much later.
Okay.
He did have proposals for a number of new distributor roads within the city. These were not motorways, but these
Right.
are urban dual carriageways by the looks of things.
So A-road stuff.
A-road stuff,
Yeah.
basically, yeah. No grade separation, nothing like that. But some new roads, some of which may well have come along. I was looking at parts of the A71 and the A8 now, and some of them look to be fairly similar. And the road that goes out to the north of Edinburgh as well from the city centre. And what's the road that goes around? Is it the A199?
The
That goes all
A199 that goes
around the north
Leith.
of Edinburgh. Yeah. So that looked to be in that plan as well.
Right.
But as was the case with a lot of things at that time, nothing really happened. There was no money, there was not a lot of drive, and Edinburgh was a very difficult place to develop in, as it still is for a number of reasons. Through the 50s and the 60s, they started to devise plans for their inner ring road, which is still a bit of a mystery to people. There's a lot of secrecy around it. People know, oh yeah, there was going to be a ring road there. Unlike Glasgow, they didn't really develop their plans to any real detailed stage. You can't go to the Edinburgh plans and say the junction that was going to be here would have been this type. I don't think they developed it to that extent. We know by 1969 that they had a 5-year programme of projected spend to build the first stages of the ring road, but the public were really
Quite against it.
proposals for an urban motorway network in Edinburgh for a number of reasons, which we're not going to discuss obviously here today. So for those reasons, the inner ring road aspect of Edinburgh's plans didn't go ahead. A key part of that proposal was the M8 coming in from the west, joining that inner ring road in the area, through Kerstorf and round about the Murrayfield area. And likewise, coming in from the east, we would have had an A1M coming in from Portobello all the way up through, probably passing at Craigmillar and where the stadium is.
Because I've had a wee look. The rough route of the A1M would have been coming off the southeast corner of the central ring.
Yeah.
And running around the south of Holyrood Park, passing the Duddingston Loch.
Yeah,
that sort of
that's
area,
right,
and then heading towards Portobello.
Yeah. So lots of this didn't happen.
Yes.
The M8 section didn't happen at all. Eventually superseded by the West Approach Road, which was then cancelled and then replaced by a much lower scale proposal, which we'll talk about some other time. In the east, however, we did get part of that A1M, but not as an
A1M.
So
yes.
really that takes us then to Portobello Bypass, doesn't it?
Portobello, Musselburgh and Trinette Bypass.
And
yes.
this was delivered in two ways. One, there was a regional section and there was a trunk section.
Yes.
So the regional section, by regional we mean it was taken forward by Lothian Regional Council, who had adopted it from the Edinburgh Corporation when it ceased to exist in 1975. They started taking the proposals forward for that. And that's really the only part of Edinburgh's 1970s plans. Those Buchanan reports that we've got copies of as well, really the only part of it that went ahead. So kick us off then with this part of the A1.
Right.
And sorry, should say before you start that the rest of the historic A1 from Princess Street to Portobello is exactly as it has always been. It's just a single 2-lane.
Pretty much single carriageway. A couple of bus lanes on it, but it's not nothing too
It's
exciting.
nothing remarkable, nothing worth talking about.
So if you follow this road, you suddenly hit a roundabout and you get kicked off onto the dual carriageway. Now this was all built kind of as separate contracts, but built at the same time. A bypass of Musselburgh had been considered since the 20s.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about as far back as that, and it was announced in July 1982.
Which is quite late.
It's quite late.
And this is often the case with a lot of the East Coast schemes. They were probably 10 years behind Glasgow in the West.
If you look at what Glasgow was doing, what we're doing with the A9 and things, this is lagging
way
behind a wee bit. Yeah.
Do we have a reason for that?
Not that I've found. Probably a bit of political decisions, probably a bit of funding.
I think funding and political. Again, we have to, I suppose, understand that traffic flows in that part of the country were not probably high.
No.
There wouldn't have been a lot of commuter traffic, I expect, at that time. And because Edinburgh was still developing as a city even at that point, it wasn't like now where you will commute in from Haddington or places like that. And I suppose the other thing to consider as well is that in terms of cross-border traffic,
there wasn't an awful lot.
There wasn't an awful lot. And what did come went via Carlisle, M6, E74.
I mean, it was the Great North Road, but it was in the 70s that it began to lose favour with that.
Yeah.
So eventually we said, right, we're going to bypass Portobello, Musselburgh and Trinette. So there was 3 or 4 schemes that I will quickly talk you through. The first one that was built at this time was Portobello Bypass. Now this is not the A1, but it was built around this time, so I thought I might as well include it.
Okay.
This is known, if you're looking at it on the map thinking, where is the Portobello Bypass? It is known as the Sir Harry Lauder Road. Now, John,
I've heard of this. I've heard that name.
Yeah,
yes.
Harry Lauder was a comedian, musician type chap who existed in the 20s, 30s and 40s, sang all these very old Scottish songs.
Sounds riveting.
Yes. So if you're interested in learning more about Harry Lauder, look him up on YouTube because there's a big playlist
of that road.
But we'll go back to the bypass.
Okay.
This was known as the Harry Lauder Road, and it was the single carriageway section that goes from where the A1 is up to the top of Portobello. Now there was 2 roundabouts at each end of this. They have been removed. It was designed by Lothian Regional Council. I'll get my notes up here. And it was built by Molam Limited and Miller Construction.
Yeah, we've heard the both of those. Yep.
And this opened around about December 1986. Okay. So this is that was Portobello Bypass. So if we move on to the A1, we've got Musselburgh Bypass. Now this is a big southern loop around the bottom of Musselburgh, and this also connects with the bypass, which we'll get to in a moment.
And is this the trunk section?
This is the half of the trunk section, after the non-trunk section. So
So is this the bit that goes kind of, where you get the New Craig Hall junction?
Yes.
Is that around there?
So from what is known as Milton Road in Edinburgh all the way down to the city bypass, that's the Lothian Regional Council section, and this was built by Tractor Shovels.
That's another contractor we hear a lot of at this side of the country.
Yep.
And from the city bypass up to what is known as the Dolphingston Junction, that was designed by Freeman Fox and Partners. Did they have a bit of involvement with the Inner Ring Road?
They did. They were involved in the sort of Buchanan reports and various other reports during the 70s, 60s and 70s in Edinburgh. Yeah.
Freeman Fox also Forth Road Bridge designers.
Big bridge constructors. Big
and
designers.
Erskine.
Yes.
And Erskine, yeah.
So Lothian Regional Council, Musselburgh Bypass. The bridges, supervision of the bridges was done by W.A. Fairhurst.
Okay.
So Bob Pritchard has given us a bit of info here. So the area between Old Craighall and New Craighall was historically subject to the effects of mining at the nearby Monkton Hall Colliery.
Okay.
The new bridges carrying bypass comprised multi- and single-span structures designed to accommodate the predicted ground movements. The colliery was still active at the start of construction, but was closed in 1997. So this is the Lothian Regional Council section.
So this is the part that goes past the Queen Margaret University.
Yes. And then at the city bypass, Freeman Fox took over and took it up to what is known as the Dolphingston Junction.
Okay.
That's the first one you
That's
get
the
onto.
fork junction between Musselburgh and Trinette. It was lying directly between them.
Okay.
This was designed by Freeman Fox and it was built by Balfour Beatty. And this opened, as well as the other section, this opened around about December 1986. Haven't been able to pin down a date on this.
Okay.
Roughly when this
if
opened.
anybody has a date,
So this whole bit, Duncan, I remember when you started researching on this, you were asking some questions about what came first in terms of the bypass. So they put the bypass in and they left room for this. Just kind of clear that up for me.
Well, John, you're the bypass expert.
So this is I'm not going to take your thunder here. I mean, this is the A1 show.
So the section of the bypass south of the A1 was that 80? Was that later? That was 88, wasn't it?
88.
Yes. So I think what happened is they built the overbridges for the roundabout. That would eventually connect up to
it's coming back to me now. That's exactly
to the
what
bypass.
they've done.
Yeah. There's another feature that happens on the A1 to the east of here. John, can you tell us what that is?
Another feature.
Another. Shall we say a legal feature that happens?
Well, it becomes a kind of special road.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's known as the A1 Expressway.
The A1 Expressway. So it's a motorway in all but name.
Yeah. Okay.
So if I wanted to take my horse and cart on it, I could not do that.
Oh, well,
I know it's a bit of a shame. It's parked outside at the moment. It's a shame.
Okay.
Musselburgh Bypass, I've got a bit of info about this. So the Musselburgh Bypass contract consists of 5.7 kilometres of dual carriageway trunk road passing to the south of Musselburgh and connects to the A1 at Dolphington Farm in the east with the Lothian Regional Council section of Musselburgh Bypass in the west. Two major interchanges are included in the works. Near Old Craig Hall at the western end, a grade-separated roundabout will provide connection to the proposed Old Craig Hall to Miller Hill section of the Outer City Bypass, and a diamond interchange near Crookston Farm.
Okay.
That then takes us on to the last wee bit of construction that went on, which was Trinette Bypass. Now this goes from the fork junction at Dolphingston. It runs round the top of Trinette to Macmerry.
Yeah.
And it merged there with an at-grade fork. There's an interesting feature of this, which I shall read out just now. The Trinette Bypass contract consists of approximately 6.7 kilometres of new trunk road passing to the north of Trinette from Macmerry in the east to the A1 at Dolphingston in the west, where it joins the Musselburgh Bypass. Connection to the A1 at Dolphingston is made by mean of a diamond interchange, and at the eastern end of the bypass, an at-grade junction provides connection to the A1 at Macmerry. Okay? This is the interesting bit here. So from Dolphingston to Bankton Roundabout. Now, Bankton Roundabout doesn't exist anymore.
It was turned into a dumbbell,
That's
was it
the
not?
dumbbell junction at the north of Trinette.
Yeah.
So from there, north of Trinette, the bypass is constructed to dual carriageway standard. From the roundabout, which provides access to the B6371, the bypass continues eastwards as a single carriageway. So the dual carriageway hit a roundabout north of Trinette, and it continued round to Macmerry as a single carriageway.
Yeah, now I'm just going to chip in here as a nitpicker because I know we have lots of nitpickers, so listen, you're obviously saying Trinette, and I've also heard people refer to it as Trinette. So we'll address that. So, it's apples and oranges and...
Let's get this. It's your podcast. He's pulling you up, and how you say
I'm not pulling it up.
I say Trinette as well. Trinette, with it, but it could be a regional thing, to be fair. And just another thing I'm going to pick up on, everybody calls these junctions different things. Some say Wallingford, Trinette Junction. No, I don't hear people say, was it Dolphington?
Dolphington is the fork.
A lot of people use these different things, because I work with a lot of guys who are on this road, and they'd use all these different names. There was Oak Tree as well, and other ones.
Oak Tree, okay.
So lots of different names. I had a sheet, but I don't have it with me. But you'll keep us right.
I'll keep going
with the official nomenclature for it.
So at the Trinette Bypass was the first of these sections to open. This opened on the 27th of March 1986, and it opened, quoting here, on a very blustery day. So,
like today then, yeah?
Yes. Okay. Last bit of info here from... Now, this little bit here is taken from a civil engineering technology article from August 1985 about the Freeman Fox sections of the bypass.
Okay.
Both contracts are to be constructed over areas which are known to contain old, shallow mine workings. Records of these workings are neither accurate nor complete, and many workings and shafts were not recorded at all. Sudden collapse of stoop and room workings and of shafts have been recorded in the area, and the whole length of the road was considered to be at risk of subsidence or collapse.
Yeah.
So if you're on the Trinette Bypass, be very careful.
This is a common theme for a lot of roads in Lothian.
In this area.
In this area. I mean, this was a problem at Sheriff Hall and other areas and stuff like that. I wouldn't want to be a civil engineer working on these projects. But
this may explain as to why they built half of the Trinette Bypass single carriageway.
Right.
Because I've not really found much else, but northeast of Trinette, in that big area, there was a shell mining area. It's closed down now, but that may be the reason why. So that was the first section of improvement that we saw up here.
Okay. So before we move on, then let me just come in with a question. Right. So prior to the construction of these bits of road, what was the old road like? Where did it go? Is it still available? Does it still exist?
The old A1 begins in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And it where the A1 suddenly turns south and goes onto the dual carriageway, the A199, which was Portobello Bypass, comes in and takes over. Right. So the A199 carries on through Musselburgh and then crosses over the dual carriageway and goes through Trinette.
So anybody who was heading, say, for the coast, and the East Coast was a popular holiday destination, still is. So you had to sneak through towns and villages to get where you were going, basically.
Along the old single carriageway, yeah.
Okay, and it's all still there then, obviously.
It's all still there, yeah. It's drivable all the way up to Dunbar, where they then start doing some online upgrading.
All right.
So and it also serves as the shall we say, the non-restricted vehicles route that can't use the expressway.
So it's a
use
good
this.
all-purpose, distributor, parallel road, basically. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So going along from there, this dual carriageway was extended up to Haddington on the 18th of November 1996.
So that's quite a gap then.
Yes.
Yeah, I vaguely remember some of my very first trips down the A1 being in the 90s as a passenger, and that being quite new. Yeah.
This was designed by Carlbro, and I think Bullen had a bit of involvement as well, and it was built by a Miller and Amy joint venture.
Okay.
Oh,
so
we've heard of those organisations.
Going back then to the end of the first bypass, was the intention always going to be that there was going to be a section of dual carriageway continuing on from there, or was it designed as a permanent solution?
Given the space around the A1, there was always going to be space to do something else, to extend it if they wanted to.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was ever going to be permanent.
So if they had, after 1986, if they decided that was the end of the dual carriageway, it would have worked properly.
It would have worked.
You wouldn't
fine,
have had like dead spars or anything like
No.
that indicating something else was coming.
Yeah.
All right, okay.
So that was that. This involved the temporary terminus at Haddington, which you remember. I vaguely remember seeing this on maps and going, "Oh, this is quite funky."
Okay.
And this is the Dumbbell interchange.
Okay.
The east of Haddington. Not much else really to say on this, but it's fairly basic, fairly straightforward dual carriageway.
Yeah.
There's a couple of gatsos on it which you have to be aware of.
Yeah.
So just point that out. And then this was extended again up to Thistley Cross roundabout at Dunbar on the 14th of April 2004.
Yeah, so I definitely remember this one. This is a long section,
This is
very
a big-
featureless, where there's hardly any junctions between it, and it was always a bit of a nightmare for diversion routes.
Yes.
Yeah,
This is
what
the
we found.
A1, the proper A1 Expressway. No junctions, just a straight through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was designed by a company I've never heard of called Scott Wilson Kirkpatrick and Partners. And
Who are they?
Who are they?
Yeah.
And it was built by Balfour-Beatty again.
Okay, so
And
big
this
names
is
there.
this is the Expressway. It doesn't feature any junctions, as you've said, and it features a very large structure over the River Tyne.
Yeah.
Now this isn't the Newcastle River Tyne. This is the East Linton River Tyne. So it's a very large
Still this
structure.
accent,
I know.
He's trying.
Just so
he's
people
trying.
don't get
This
confused.
is why we love you, having been down here, Duncan. You keep us smiling. But
Thanks.
No,
Thank you.
This expressway section is the section that I remember being completed, and I remember using the old road before it, and there was a whole debate for a number of years about exactly the form that this project would take. And at one point they had two schemes in the go. There was the originally promoted scheme, which had 2 additional junctions
Yes.
along its length, and the orders were actually made for that scheme, and I believe there had been a public inquiry for that scheme.
Yes.
And then devolution comes along and the Scottish Executive come in and they review the entire roads proposals for Scotland at that time. And when they come back in November 1999, they decided to go with this cut back version, this expressway version. Yeah. And the justification really for that was improved journey times and safety, wasn't it? Was there not some local concerns about the lack of junctions that were being constructed?
Yes, I have a bit for here from the opening booklet
Okay.
of the Scott Wilson section, so I'll quickly
Yeah.
read this out. Following the routes south of Edinburgh study in 1990, the decision was taken by the Scottish Executive to upgrade the A1 to near motorway standards as far as Dunbar. The Scottish Executive appointed Carlbro as consultant to prepare proposals to upgrade the A1 from Trinette to Haddington and from Haddington to Dunbar.
Yeah.
A preferred route for Haddington to Dunbar was published in 1992. Following a period of further consultation and scheme development, a public local inquiry was held in 1997. During 1997-98, the junctions at Monksmuir and Fantasy were deleted from the scheme in order to reduce the environmental impact and the cost of the scheme. The concept of the A1 Expressway emerged at this stage. In 1999, the Strategic Roads Review carried out by the Scottish Executive confirmed the Expressway as the preferred scheme. And this was the same discussion that said we're going to build this, and the M77 and I think Portobello Bypass was included in that.
It was
Not a
also the
lot of
one that
roads.
referred the M74 completion back to the local authorities and in essence delayed it by 2 years. It's a well remembered.
So one of the things, just looking at the map, is it's very frustrating for people in East Linton. They do not have a junction, and that was the one where you were saying that what a great name this is, what fantasy. But there is a railway that runs all along through here as well. It would have been difficult.
Yeah, there's very few overbridges that go over and under the railway line, so that was maybe a constraint. One thing I can quickly throw in here is that the 1930s bypasses of East Linton and Haddington appeared around about this time. So they date from around 1928, 1930. Okay. This isn't what a modern bypass. This is just avoiding the town centre by cutting along the top or along the bottom, and they're still there to this day.
So they've been bypassed again? Mm-hmm. Okay. Interesting.
So there you go.
Bypass of the bypass.
Yes.
Okay.
So that takes us up to Thistly Cross Roundabout.
So I have a kind of question about the whole thing. We're talking a lot about A1 Express. There's probably people who use this road, and a lot of people ask questions about special road status. Was there a particular reason? Does anybody know here, or maybe Duncan, you can answer why they wanted to do this?
I could speculate for you.
Okay.
I've had a little think. The parallel road, the A199, is actually, if you drive it, it's not what you would... It's not like the old A9 between Bankfoot and Burnham, for example. The old A9 is very windy, very bendy. This old A1 is very straight, very flat, very easy to do overtaking on. So I can imagine
it's wide.
Yeah. So I can imagine they could say, okay, we'll keep this because this is a pretty good standard road, and we've got the space to build something alongside it out of the way.
Right.
Because next, along the old A1, there's a lot of accesses. There's a lot of houses sitting right next to the road. So I imagine getting these out of the way or diverted around would have been a bit of a problem. So it's probably easier to just go, we've got the space, may as well build it.
Build a kind of special road here, yeah. And we don't have to have a blue line on a map, but it functions as a blue line.
It functions I drove along it on Tuesday. It functions very well.
Yeah.
Very well.
Yeah. Interesting. I as you say, it is basically a blue line on a map, isn't it?
It's one of these
in all
things.
In
all but name. It's I find it particularly at that eastern end, the newer sections, it feels very motorway-like, there without much happening either side. You're just straight through,
I suppose the A9 upgrade will feel quite like that section of road.
Yes. So, we also get that with the Aberdeen bypass, feels like that as well.
Yeah, well, except for the awkward...
For the junctions.
Roundabouts.
Clean Hill roundabout on the Aberdeen bypass. That's a discussion and an argument for another day. But
one day we'll have an A90 one.
A90 podcast.
An A90 podcast. That'll probably have to be over 3. But there you go. So
do we have traffic flow information for that? Is this a busy bit of road now?
Yes. It sits at around 35,000 at Edinburgh. Yeah. And it slowly sort of peters down to 10,000 vehicles at Dunbar. And then between Dunbar and essentially Morpeth, way down north of Newcastle, it picks up again. So this is the start of the sort of quieter section of the A1.
Okay. Which leads me on to another part here is an overall strategy for the A1 from the border to Edinburgh, is that they've been incrementally dualling this, since the 1980s, so it seems like that. What do you think there's value much in dualling the whole lot all the way down to Berwick? Because there are lots of other ways you can get across the border. I've often seen it. So I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are.
Having been down it on Monday, as I've said, it would be nice, but because the dual carriageway sections where they are, the single carriageways are quite short. They don't last. They're not like the big long sections in the A9. You're sitting behind a slow convoy for a couple of minutes, maybe at least, and then you've got some overtaking before it all narrows down. But then you've got the expressways each side.
Don't say too much on that, because that's obviously an analysis that we've got lined up for part 2. Where we discuss the future of the route and how it could develop further. So don't give any more details around that at this stage.
So, sorry to
John's
jump
getting
the
ahead
gun.
of himself. Sorry about that. So. At Thistly Cross roundabout, that roundabout is the first at-grade junction
since
Edinburgh. And then I suppose, so really after Sheriff Hall and Old Craig Hall, so that whole stretch
the first
of A1
interruption.
And
then it's, I think, after you've spot roundabout, but that's for part 2.
Okay. Any further figures, facts and details you want to give us on any of these sections?
I was going to say, not really, no, it's a fairly straightforward bit of road. It's a fairly straight and flat dual carriageway. Not much else really going on apart from that bridge over the River Tyne, which is I recommend giving it a wee visit because it's quite impressive.
Yeah, I've never stopped at it. Certainly go over it. You don't sometimes realise you're on it, but
it's a big structure. Yeah,
it's a very big one. Yeah, I think I've seen some lovely photographs of it when it opened. We did get a lot of stuff from Scott Wilson.
Yes,
and these sections I remember seeing the pictures.
I've seen some scary pictures of the lorries getting blown over because this is quite a flat area, so the wind can hurt it a wee bit. So just be aware of that.
Okay, so that more or less covers the stretch we were looking to talk about in part one, Duncan. I think we've given pretty much all the information we can in that. This seems like a good point to cover some of the listener questions that were submitted, because we've got a couple that relate to this northern section. Yeah. So John is going to ask you some of these questions, or the two questions, and take it away.
Oh, yeah, it feels like shoes on the other foot. It's normally you asking us, isn't it? So no, this is strange. So a couple from Twitter here. Okay, so it's Robert Kilcoyne. I think Robert's asked us a few questions in the past. His first question was, when the expressway was built between Haddington and Thistley Cross, which is what you've spoken about, 9-mile section without any exit, why was there no intermediate junction built for East Linton, which the A1 bypasses very close to the south? And I think we did answer this.
We've kind of answered this. Yeah, this is primarily to keep the costs down.
Yeah, it was mostly cost and environmental. Those kind of the environmental aspect being worked in there as was common in a lot of those late 90s schemes.
Yeah. So they did plan it. There were junctions planned. You touched on that, but it came down to cost.
Hopefully that's answered that one for Robert.
Robert has another. Okay, so he does ask, when the old Craighall interchange with the A720 was built, was there ever any plan to make the A1 flow directly onto the A720 with traffic for the A1 into the Edinburgh turning off? So I think he's talking about a kind of free flow,
a big free flow
lamps or ramps or a fork or something like that. Was there any plans for that?
No that I've seen.
Okay.
John, you're an Edinburgh Bypass expert here, so...
have I seen any on my end? No. Here's the thing I'll say, is that the joined-up planning between the bypass and the A1 and stuff, or there was some that centred around Craighall, I never seen any plans like that. It makes sense now in hindsight. I see what he's kind of talking about, and it would be great. Although there are some modifications they've made to Old Craighall with the additional of traffic lights and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, certainly in the information booklets, the opening booklets we have from the 80s, that there was never any indication that grade separation
I've never seen it.
No. There was something I saw recently, actually, on the internet of people wanting a big slip road came in. So rather than coming down towards the bypass and going left at the roundabout, you would just go round this big slip and you would get chucked onto the bypass.
I believe East Lothian Council are promoting that and are looking to take that forward.
Yeah, that's that kind of a bypass for the roundabout. Yeah. So you're going north on the A1 and then onto the Civic bypass westbound.
It would be fairly straightforward to put in. The only problem is that there's a bridge on the bypass that's fairly close, so that might be a bit of a constraint, but anything to get traffic flowing a bit quicker.
Interesting. Okay, interesting. We had another question from David Smith on Facebook, who was asking about whether the upgrading of the A1 to dual carriageway has contributed to the sprawl of Edinburgh. Towards the east. Is it? It's almost created a commuter belt to the east of the city. Would you say that that many more people now are driving from the east into Edinburgh daily than they would have been in the 80s and even in the 1990s?
Oh yeah. When I drove along it, it really picks up near Musselburgh, Trinette. And as you're sort of going towards the bypass, I remember everyone went onto the bypass and there was a few cars going in and out. It was quite an even split. So it's kind of served the function of the M77. So it's connected up Ayrshire, Dunbar, up to the big city.
I like how the way you've drawn parallels between the two cities and the suburban areas around them. No, that's right. I mean, a lot of these large, we've often spoken about car-dependent estates and developments coming through there and stuff like that will obviously drive things. But that's how civilization works. It's progress, isn't it?
And it makes me think of a question, and we might not know the answer to this. It might need a bit more research. But when you get to Old Craighall on the A1, what proportion of traffic drops off and goes west on the 720, and what proportion continues north and goes into Edinburgh?
What a fantastic question. We don't know this, but I would imagine that the higher proportion, from what I have observed, takes that city bypass.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
People don't like taking their cars into Edinburgh. No. And Edinburgh City Council makes sure that's the case.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people are using that to cut across. And
and I suppose it's an interesting one as well, because, and again, this might be a good discussion for part 2, but when you think about cross-border traffic and travel on the route, I think Euston would be something like 20%. Compared to the 80% that's using the M74 corridor.
Because it's circuitous, I find it's not actually a direct route over the English border because it hugs the coast.
No, it goes way out east and then turns south.
Yeah,
so that's a good point, a good discussion point for part 2. Is to think about the route, how the route performs as an option when compared against the A68, the A7, the A698, these other options.
I've never had a problem with the Scottish side. It's the English side that I find where you get these quite long single.
There's a very long section south of Berwick.
And I know highway Motorways England are addressing this, but hey, that's another big discussion.
Definitely.
As you say, let's save it for part 2.
That's for
We'll
our
get into the
English
analysis.
A1 podcast.
Oh, don't mention it.
All the way down to London.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that sums up part 1. So I hope you do join us again for part 2, which will be released a couple of weeks after this one. As always, you can find all episodes of the podcast on Podbean, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and anywhere else you find podcasts. They are on YouTube now as well.
Everywhere. And don't forget about social media. I know I say it every time, but you can see us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram as well, and see some of the great content we have in the archive that we share with you.
Yeah, you'll get a daily fix on there. And of course, our website continues to develop at glasgowmotorwayarchive.org. Lots of new material on there that continues to expand every month. Lots of new stuff to see on there. But on that happy note, I think we'll call it a day there, and we'll see you all for part 2.
Okay, we will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.